Once upon a time, there was a very strong and popular antagonist known as Ryomen Sukuna. Now, he was so strong that some delusional glazers actually believed that he was going to fully win the story of Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, those glazers are hopefully extinct now because after what feels like years, Ryomen Sukuna is finally dead. However, after getting some inspiration from Twitter, I started to wonder if Sukuna actually could have won if he took over a different sorcerer's body instead of Megumi's. So, in this video, I'm gonna suggest 5 sorcerers that Sukuna could have taken over, which would have made him even stronger than Megumi did. Originally, I didn't really think anything would compare to Sukuna with Megumi's 10 Shadows and Mahoraga, but after a few hours of smashing my 2 remaining brain cells together, I realized that there were many sorcerers Sukuna could take over, which would definitely make him more dangerous than Megumi did. Before we get started though, if this video can somehow reach 1,000 likes, I can't believe I'm gonna say this, I will do the entirety of my next chapter review in a terrible Satoru Gojo cosplay. Anyway, let's get cooking. So, the first sorcerer that I think would make a deadlier vessel for Sukuna is everyone's favorite curse speech user, Toge Inamaki. And by the way, I've not forgotten that only like 1 in a million people can be a vessel for Sukuna without dying, but for the sake of entertainment, we're gonna assume that all of these sorcerers can. I mean, what do you want from me? You just want me to say, oh, Sukuna took over Inamaki and then f***ing dies? See you next time? No, that's boring, and I don't do boring. Anyway, let's say that Gojo just got sealed in Shibuya, and then Yuji starts making his way over to save him. At one point, he sees Inamaki, who's all like, salmon, kelp. But before Yuji can respond, Sukuna goes, rah, and chain, motherfucker, and then bam, Inamaki gets perception blitzed and a finger shoved down his throat. Inamaki then grows even more face tattoos and will now be known as Inukuna. Okay, no, fine, that's a shit name, whatever. Now, a 15 plus finger strength Sukuna with a curse speech technique is most definitely scarier than the 10 Shadows, in my opinion. When it comes to curse speech, the effectiveness of the words and the amount of backlash you take are all dependent on how strong your opponent is. In the case of a 15 plus finger strength Sukuna though, there is only one sorcerer alive who could possibly be a problem for him. The gap between Sukuna and literally every other sorcerer is so great that he could literally walk around shouting die, and without any backlash, they would all collapse. And yes, I think commands like die or explode would definitely work on sorcerers as strong as Shinjuku, Yuta, and Yuji, assuming that Sukuna is somewhere above 15 fingers and at full strength. It's also an amazing crowd control ability that would help Sukuna a lot when getting jumped, which was ultimately his defeat. There is a counter to curse speech though, where you can basically reinforce your ears and brain with cursed energy. Now, assuming Sukuna's curse speech isn't so strong that it could just blow past any sorcerer's reinforcement, there is an even more dangerous way that Sukuna can actually use it. If he fully incarnated into his Heian form, he could use his 4 arms and 2 mouths, meaning that he can keep his opponent too busy fighting him, and then he can drop a sneaky get crushed on them with his second mouth. It would also be very easily interchangeable with Shrine, so if he had it, I don't really think he will lose a jumping. However, there is a major weakness to this option. Sukuna's curse speech would absolutely no-diff anybody with the exception of Satoru Gojo. Now, first off, Infinity does actually auto-detect anything charged with cursed energy, meaning that curse speech will not reach him. But even if Sukuna used it once Gojo's curse technique had burnt out following domain expansion, Gojo is so strong that Sukuna might genuinely take backlash from commands like die. And when I say backlash, I mean it could happen to him. I think the only commands that are actually usable against Gojo are ones like don't move, which obviously is not as good as Mahoraga. In conclusion, curse speech Sukuna is OP as fuck unless he's fighting the Honored One. Okay, next up we're gonna see how dangerous Sukuna would be if he took over the body of Yuki Tsukumo. So there Yuji is, frozen in the ice with Yuki in front of him talking to Kenjaku. Sukuna would obviously be very jealous because he doesn't have cake like Yuki does, so he would want to take some of that for himself. And just like last time, bam, in chain, finger down throat, and then Yuki awakens as Sukuna. With Sukuna's insane level of cursed energy and his near Gojo level cursed energy efficiency, he would make Yuki's Star Rage technique a one-shot machine for pretty much any sorcerer. Literally anyone who gets within arm's reach of Sukuna dies to a single punch. That means every Jujutsu High student gets one shot, including Shinjuku, Yuta, and Yuji. Ryu Ishiguri would also just get one banged, again, and so would Yorozu, even with her insect armor. It also means that Curse Technique Kashimo will die even faster than he did, because the second he closes the distance, bam, 4 arms worth of Star Rage will literally reduce him to jelly. Sukuna does just already no-diff everyone with Shrine alone though, so this is kind of boring. The real real test of strength is to see how far Star Rage Sukuna can take down Satoru Gojo compared to the Mahoraga plan. Now, we determined that Curse Speech would not be anywhere near as good as Mahoraga for dealing with Gojo, but to be honest, I think Star Rage is going to be so much better. After breaking Infinite Void from the outside and burning Gojo out of his technique, all Sukuna would need to do is the exact same thing he did in the actual fight. He would just need to rush in and stop Gojo leaving, and then throw hands while Gojo's Infinity is down. Against the unreal destructive power of Star Rage though, Gojo has no chance in a hand-to-hand fight against Sukuna. If Yuki was able to take both of Kenjaku's reinforced arms off in one punch, then imagine what Sukuna would do to Gojo. If Gojo blocks, then he simply loses his arms and then his head gets instantly caved in. Sukuna would literally win low to mid diff in the first domain clash. So yeah, taking over Yuki's body would definitely make for the most dangerous Sukuna yet. However, that's all about to change because next up is the GOAT, Fumiko Takaba. Now, in case you don't know, Takaba possesses the objectively best curse technique in the entire verse, the comedian technique. I mean, Gege literally states in the manga that as a technique, comedian even surpasses limitless by like a lot. I mean, it is just straight up reality bending, and not the B-Tech reality bending like Gear 5, actual reality bending. As long as the user finds themselves funny, they can do anything. So if Sukuna took Takaba's body and made a joke about Gojo turning into a frog, then it would happen, provided that Sukuna actually finds it funny. Something people forget though is that as long as the user is confident and in the comedy zone, they become completely invulnerable to damage. I mean, not that Sukuna isn't pretty much invulnerable to damage anyway, but you know what I mean. Like, every attack does land on Takaba, but he literally just doesn't take a single scratch. It's like the damage never happened. Now, I think this curse technique is so dangerous in Sukuna's hands because his entire thing is always being crazy confident and finding entertainment in everything he can. Entertainment is literally his only motive as a villain. I mean, take the moment where Sukuna and Arame make fun of Yuji, for example. With the comedian technique, Sukuna would make the joke and then Yuji would actually turn into that statue that they're talking about. Due to Takaba being a very morally driven person and a complete moron, the technique was never used to even half its full potential. But for someone like Sukuna, who does not care about cold-blooded murder, it becomes incredibly deadly. Also, yes, you can use the technique to kill, it's just that Takaba refuses to, so don't give me that weird excuse. Basically, by taking over Takaba's body, Sukuna will become immune to damage and able to do anything he could ever want. I mean, it would make him damn near omnipotent. I think I've made my point very clear though, so let's move on. Okay, the next vessel that Sukuna could have taken that would have made him so much stronger is Mai Zenin, and he would do this in order to gain her absolutely busted construction technique. Now, I'm sure a few of you are wondering why I chose Mai as the vessel over Yorozu. Well, that's actually very simple. Yorozu was also a cursed object that had a vessel, so Sukuna wouldn't be able to take over her or any other incarnated sorcerer like Kashimo or Ryu. That's why I simply chose a sorcerer with the same broken-ass technique, Mai Zenin. Now, the technique is completely wasted on Mai because construction is literally the most cursed energy inefficient curse technique we have ever seen. She literally could only make one rubber bullet a day. She's actually just a Miwa victim, bro. Oh, yeah. Even Yorozu, who was stated to have very high cursed energy and output, still has to be so careful with the technique just because of how unbelievably inefficient it is. In Sukuna's hands though, well, you might as well just remove the limits completely. Not only does he have as much cursed energy as Gege wants him to have, but his efficiency is said to be similar to Gojo's, and Gojo has the damn 6 eyes. Bro's efficiency is so good that it's literally stated he could open as many domain expansions as he needed in a single day, given that he recovers his curse technique each time. Imagine how dangerous he would be with a completely unlimited construction technique. Not only would he be able to create a perfect sphere, but he's probably good enough to create a bunch of mini perfect spheres that move faster than Yorozu's big one. Now, I don't claim to be a scientist or anything, but due to perfect sphere having infinite pressure, I have seen people argue that it would tear through Gojo's infinity. Personally though, I think people just hear the word infinite and then immediately jump on Gojo's ass and go, haha, this can beat you. As long as he knows the composition of what he's making though, he could literally create anything. I mean, he might even be able to create cursed tools like Mai and Yorozu both did, but without sacrificing his life for it. I mean, imagine he pulled up to fight Gojo with Inverted Spear of Heaven Mark II. It's literally over for Gojo. Like, that guy's getting Vietnam flashbacks and running away. I don't care. He won't even make it to domain expansion. It's just over. Now, Sukuna could potentially be held back by Maki's existence, but the solution to that is very easy. He just needs to unexist Maki. The idea is that Sukuna could bring out the full planet-destroying power of Mai's construction technique. Anyway, the final sorcerer that I want to talk about, which Sukuna could have taken over to become become even stronger is actually one that you will most likely be surprised by at first, but trust me, it's for a good reason. I have chosen the blood-manipulating heir to the Kamo clan, Noritoshi Kamo. Similar to Mai, I chose Noritoshi because I wanted Sukuna to get his hands on blood manipulation, but without taking over Chozo, because like Yorozu, Chozo already inhabits a vessel. Now, blood manipulation has been widely regarded as one of the big three techniques of Jujutsu throughout history, and it is implied that at some point through history, its full potential was able to compete with the 10 Shadows and the Limitless technique. In Chozo's hands, the technique is already insanely strong and is easily one of the most versatile techniques in the entire series. In Sukuna's hands though, blood manipulation would be way too overpowered. I mean, he literally perfectly replicated piercing blood using Max Elephant's water after only observing others using it 3 or 4 times ever. Not to mention the fact that Megana's low output piercing flood drew blood from Satoru Gojo, a man so durable that he managed to tank a boosted Malevolent Shrine. Imagine how deadly it would be if he could access the entire technique. And on top of that, his cursed energy efficiency means that he can just use as much blood as he wants because then he can simply create more. Now, we are getting into a little bit of headcanon here, but I am certain that Sukuna would be able to unlock the full potential of the blood manipulation curse technique, just as he did with Megumi's 10 Shadows. And since its full potential is implied to compete with the 10 Shadows and Limitless, I'm sure it could do some crazy things. The craziest possibility I can think of though is it just straight up allows you to bloodbend. Like, if he can control other people's blood, then Gojo Loki gets no diffed without infinity even being a problem. I mean, when I think about it, it wouldn't actually be that hard because we know that blood manipulators can control any substance or object mixed with their own blood. So Sukuna just needs to make his attacks coated with his own blood, and then once it enters the opponent's bloodstream, bam, bloodbending. Easy clap, verse gets wiped. Anyway, those are 5 sorcerers that I think could have made for an even deadlier vessel than Megumi. So much so that Sukuna might have just won the whole series. Before we wrap shit up though, I'm gonna very quickly rank all of them from worst to best because I know you guys love a ranking. At last place is the blood manipulation of Noritoshi Kamo, simply because its full potential is just headcanon. And then I'm gonna place Inamaki in 4th because despite Curse Speech being an instant one-shot to 99% of people, it's not gonna help him as much as Mahoraga did against Satoru Gojo. In 3rd place is Mai's construction, due to how freely Sukuna can use it, and just spamming perfect spears is crazy. In 2nd place is Yuki Tsukumo, because Star Rage Sukuna one-bangs literally everybody, including a burnt-out Gojo. And surprise, surprise, 1st place goes to Takaba, because duh. To this day, one of the hottest topics in JJK is whether Gojo could have beaten Heian form Sukuna with no Mahoraga. But let's be honest, that topic has been covered more times than Sukuna has made binding vows, so I've decided to put a much more interesting spin on it. In chapter 230, Sukuna taunts Gojo for not being able to open his domain. Sukuna basically said that Gojo was lucky not to be born in the same era as him, because then he would never have been called the strongest. So in this video, we're gonna see if that statement is actually true by exploring what would have happened if Satoru Gojo was born in the Heian era. I already know some people are going to struggle to comprehend that this video is simply a fun hypothetical, but guess what? I don't care, go cry about it. Also, I know some people will take Sukuna's statement as gospel because they're crazy glazers, but they are forgetting the fact that Sukuna said this thinking he had won. Sukuna continued to call Gojo ordinary just before his brain turned to soup and Gojo started beating his ass so hard Sukuna started crying for his mummy. So yeah, there is a very real discussion to be had here, but it is just a hypothetical, so if you disagree and it's actually for a valid reason, then that's fine. Also, no, Gojo being in the Heian era does not just make him Sugawara Michizane. They are completely different people with completely different levels of strength, and we don't even know if their abilities work the same way. Having the same technique does not make you the same person. Anyway, let's start off by seeing what Gojo would have been like in the Heian era, and then pitch him against the prime Heian era Sukuna to see who the real strongest would have been. Okay, we're gonna start off by quickly exploring if Gojo would also awaken in the Heian era. Now, when I made a poll asking if you want to see this video, a lot of people said there's no point because Gojo would just die before awakening, to which I am going to respond with, are you dumb? Sorcerers weren't just instantly killed as children because it was the Heian era. He could very easily grow up just as Uro Yorozu and all the other sorcerers did. It's not like Sukuna went around hunting children sorcerers, you know? If anything, he'd want them to grow up to be an actual opponent for him. The only way this would actually be the case is if Kenjaku killed him as a baby, and I'm pretty sure he wasn't doing that yet. Plus, if that did happen, Gojo would be dead and there would be no video, so for everybody's sake, I'm gonna assume that he actually grows up. Now, Gojo's soul and innate personality would remain intact, but he would likely be much less less arrogant than he was in the Hidden Inventory arc. In our time, pre-RCT Gojo was still pretty much uncontested as the strongest, but in the Heian era that would not be the case. A sorcerer with a strong-ass domain, like Yorozu, would likely wipe the floor with Teen Gojo. Now, Gojo, being the absolutely insane natural talent that he is, awakened his reverse curse technique when he finally got humbled and put close to death by Toji Fushiguro. Considering the fact Teen Gojo in the Heian era would have much less need for humbling and have more experiences with tougher opponents, he would still be capable of learning reverse curse technique, auto infinity, red, and purple. Gojo's isolation in being the strongest would also likely still be a thing after awakening and learning infinite void, because he would then wipe the floor with pretty much everybody except Sukuna and maybe the vengeful spirits. The point of this is that his fighting style and desire to actually be challenged will remain intact. However, he will also have a more survival of the fittest mindset that comes with growing up in the Heian era. Our Gojo grew up so much stronger than anything else, hence why he was so arrogant and also why he was not living up to his own potential. Once Toji taught him that he wasn't truly the strongest, he was then able to awaken and reach his full potential. So yes, Gojo will be capable of reaching the strength he is now, and that's because he will have been actually challenged since birth. We have established Heian Gojo can reach modern Gojo's strength, and that his personality / mindset would be relatively similar, so it's now time to get into the most important point of the video. Not only can Heian era Gojo match modern Gojo's strength, he could potentially be much stronger, and I mean levels stronger. There are many reasons I think this, but before I get into them, I want to remind you that this is purely hypothetical because we know all about the Heian era. Any silly comments that still complain about this will be met with responses exclusively in rice ball ingredients because I cannot be bothered. Anyway, my main reason for thinking he can be stronger is simply because of how level Jujutsu was in the Heian era. Kenjaku, Sukuna, and Yorozu are obviously the best examples of how the Heian era was just a higher level, but after all these years the information was slowly lost. For instance, Yorozu suggests that she knows about Shrine, so Shrine's details were likely known in the Heian era. Sukuna also seemed surprised when Jogo wasn't aware of how Shrine worked, but then he realized even if there were records, a cursed spirit wouldn't have access to that information. So now I'm going to run through all of the lost abilities that were present in the Heian era and why Heian Gojo could potentially learn them. The first major ability, which was considered impossible in modern times until Sukuna revealed it, is an open domain barrier. Both Sukuna and Kenjaku, two Heian era sorcerers, have open domain barriers. And it's not like Sukuna and Kenjaku were training buddies or anything, so it's unlikely that one of them taught this to the other. They would have learnt it completely independently from each other, suggesting that open barriers were slightly more common knowledge in the Heian era. I'm not saying they were common knowledge or many people could use them, but they were definitely a thing. And no, just because Kenjaku taught Sukuna how to split his soul does not mean he taught him other stuff. That was purely for Kenjaku's plan and part of their binding vow. Considering how many sorcerers fought Sukuna in the Heian era and how widely known his strength was, the fact that he has an open domain barrier would surely be widely known too. In modern times, Gojo only became aware of the possibility of an open barrier during the fight, or at most a month before the fight. However, if Satoru Gojo grew up in the Heian era knowing it was a thing, not only would he be more prepared to deal with it, but there's also a good chance he could learn it for himself. There is no denying that Gojo's level of genius for Jujutsu is contested only by Sukuna. Higuruma, Yuta, and Yuji could also be contenders, but we haven't really seen enough of that from them yet. In the middle of their fight, Gojo constantly adjusted the properties of his barrier, and Sukuna did the same. Now, according to Kusakabe GPT, this should be completely impossible, but Gojo is simply that guy. If he can learn to change conditions mid-battle, imagine if he had prior knowledge of open domain barriers and the time to perfect it. If Sukuna and Kenjaku can do it, then best believe Gojo does have the raw talent to do it, given the time and knowledge. I'll expand more on this later, but Gojo would straight up low diff that fight against Heian era Sukuna if he also had an open domain barrier. But for Sukuna's sake, let's just assume that he can't use it for now. He will still know about it going into a fight with Sukuna, meaning he will have time to plan a strategy as opposed to improvising mid-fight. Now, I'm not saying this will mean Gojo can win, but it will give him better odds. Now, this next one is a lot less simple, since it is unconfirmed whether Sukuna actually knew this ability already or if he learned it from Gojo during the fight. But if healing a burnt out curse technique was also common knowledge in the Heian era, Gojo will know that there is a limit to how often it can be done and change his strategy accordingly. I think this one is much less likely to be widely known, and there's a good chance that Gojo was straight up the one to invent the technique, but who knows? Simply put, if he knew about the limitations, he would not have pushed himself to the point of losing his domain. Again, I'm not saying this means he will win the fight, but it will give him better odds, and we are going to discuss this more later. Now, before I fully put Heian Gojo and Heian Sukuna against each other, I'm gonna first clarify some key differences between current Sukuna and actual Heian era Sukuna. First off, he'll have no 10 Shadows technique and no vessel. He is just him. Then there is the fact that he is already in Heian form, meaning higher output and better hand-to-hand capabilities, but it also means that Sukuna will not have a backup healing plan. There'll also be more of an information gap on Sukuna's part. He won't know what Infinite Void does in detail, nor will he know that touching Gojo actually protects you from it. And this is simply because anyone who has been trapped in Infinite Void won't live to tell the tale, and Gojo won't exactly be walking around explaining it to people. Of course, this is assuming that Gojo uses a closed barrier as opposed to an open one, because onlookers of an open barrier will be able to tell what's going on. And finally, there is Kamatoke and Hiten, although we have zero clue about what Hiten does, so I'm not even gonna guess, because the odds are Infinity completely renders them both useless anyway. So now that I have covered Heian Gojo's potential and Heian Sukuna's differences, it's finally time to pitch them against each other and see who would actually be crowned as the strongest. Because there are lots of hypotheticals and assumptions involved, I'm gonna split the fight into different scenarios. For scenario 1, we are assuming that Gojo has learned how to use an open domain barrier, and that is literally the only assumption we are gonna go off, because if Gojo does have an open domain barrier, literally everything else becomes irrelevant. The fact of the matter is, Gojo will just low diff that fight. Gojo and Sukuna's domains are equal in terms of refinement, and their guaranteed hits cancel out. Without a physical barrier for Sukuna to target, he cannot break Gojo's domain, meaning Gojo can still use Infinity and the rest of the Limitless technique. This means that they've got to hand-to-hand it until one of them does enough damage for the opposing domain to fail. And in a hand-to-hand fight with Infinity active and no Mahoraga, Gojo whoops Sukuna's ass 10 out of 10 times. I mean, we have literally seen it happen, there is no denying this. It really doesn't matter how many arms or tools Sukuna has. With Domain Amp being the only way to land a hit, Sukuna really just gets cooked. Sure, Sukuna's Heian form in theory increases Malevolent Shrine's output, but there has been nothing stating it would improve the actual domain's refinement. It's very simple. If Sukuna cannot outright destroy Gojo's domain, he just gets low diff. I mean, here, let me just show you what it would look like, okay? Now for scenario 2, we're going to assume that Gojo does know about the open barrier, but he cannot use one for himself. We are also going to assume that neither Gojo nor Sukuna had prior knowledge on healing a burnt out curse technique. And yes, in case you're wondering, Gojo will get some kind of assumption per scenario, like knowing about the open barrier, because without it, it just becomes normal Gojo, which defeats the whole point of the video. Due to Gojo's personality being much the same and him not knowing about the limitations of curse technique burnout, this scenario should play out very similarly to their actual fight, despite knowing about the open barrier. If Gojo somehow makes it past the first clash, he will still keep trying to expand a domain until he completely burns out. Now, anime fans, please try not to get too excited when I say this, but we're actually gonna do some scaling real quick. Utahime's boost brought Gojo to 120% output, but Gojo's own hand signs and chants pushed it up to 200%. So let's assume that Heian Sukuna's output with hand signs and chants also allows for an 80% increase in output. Considering Gojo's wounds were deep but not fatal against Megana, it's likely an 80% increase from Heian form Sukuna would at very least render Gojo incapable of fighting. And in that case, Sukuna does just win. However, if Gojo can somehow survive long enough to use Falling Blossom Emotion or Simple Domain and then heal his curse technique, he does have a chance. Let's assume that the first two clashes are just about survivable for Gojo. Gojo will not have Prison Realm experience, so he cannot reduce the size of his barrier. But at the same time, Sukuna cannot deactivate the sure hit inside of Gojo's barrier to increase output outside of the barrier because he doesn't know he can touch Gojo to survive it. Now let's assume Gojo's loss of protection equals Sukuna's loss of output. Sukuna is still in Heian form. He still gets that 80% boost. Not only does this mean he can tank more damage, but it also means he can make up for the output loss so that Gojo will lose every single domain clash he gets into. Basically, Sukuna wins in this scenario low to mid diff. Now this final scenario follows the same assumptions as the previous, but this time both Gojo and Sukuna already know how to heal their curse technique and they know about the limitations. Now this knowledge could completely change Gojo's approach to combating Sukuna, since he won't want to constantly try and reopen his domain and eventually burn out. Now the first domain clash would pretty much go the same way in order for Gojo to test the waters and see if this domain can beat Sukuna's. After realizing their domains have equal refinement, but Sukuna wins from the outside, one of two things will happen. Either Gojo will get instantly shredded by Malevolent Shrine, which I don't think is likely, or Gojo survives just long enough to heal his curse technique. Since he already knows how to do this, he would likely only have to survive for a few seconds and then use blue to exit Sukuna's domain. Now Gojo is not dumb. If he knows that constantly healing his curse technique will destroy his brain and remove Infinite Void, he will not do it any more than necessary. And remember that Gojo's speed with blue is levels faster than Sukuna, so much so that it's mistaken for teleportation, so he can easily exit an open domain. If Gojo aims to simply avoid Malevolent Shrine for the duration of the fight, Sukuna will be forced to give up on catching Gojo inside of his domain. Of course, Sukuna could fix this issue by enclosing his domain in a barrier, but then he can't break Gojo's domain and will end up with a result like scenario 1. If Gojo does use this strategy, he again low diffs Sukuna, but that's only if Gojo chooses to fight this way and if he can survive Heian Sukuna's domain for long enough. Overall, I'd give this scenario an even 50-50 between them because I can see it going either way. Given that Sukuna had Heian era knowledge and info on Gojo, whereas Gojo had jack shit, it's clear to see why Sukuna vs modern Gojo would almost always go Sukuna's way. But despite the information gap and Mahoraga, Sukuna was still surprised at how close that fight actually turned out to be. Remember, Sukuna had a plan, whereas Gojo was improvising and still made the fight go way longer than Sukuna expected. After all, Sukuna thought he had won in chapter 230, but Gojo ended up just being him. Although not every scenario goes this way, Heian era Gojo overall just has better odds than a modern era Gojo. And the most significant difference was definitely the possibility of an open domain barrier. Pair Gojo's crazy natural talent for Jujutsu with prior knowledge of open domains and the time to learn it, and I genuinely believe Gojo straight up low diff Sukuna. But again, these are all just hypotheticals. The point is, his odds are just much better in the Heian era. Therefore, Sukuna was just wrong. I mean, if anything, Sukuna was lucky that Gojo wasn't born in his era. Giving Gojo access to all of that high-level Jujutsu knowledge would simply make him far more challenging than current Gojo ever was. So, my recent Heian era Gojo video did pretty damn well, and I had lots of fun making it, so I want to see if I can turn it into a series. And who better than everybody's goat, Yuta Okkotsu, to be the next sorcerer we send back to the golden age of Jujutsu. Now, before we get started, there is something very important that I do need to clear up. Obviously, this is all a hypothetical scenario purely for your own entertainment. There are obviously countless possibilities, but we're gonna explore the ones that work best for the video. So please, no leaving comments like, oh, he wouldn't have copy because Rika wouldn't be born yet. Like, no shit, neither was Yuta. That's the literal definition of hypothetical. I mean, he could also get bitten by a poisonous spider and fall off a cliff. The possibilities are completely endless. So think of this video as me exploring Heian Yuta's full potential versus Shinjuku Yuta's full potential. Oh, and one more thing before we start. If this video can get 2k likes, I will make a what if Hikari was from the Heian era video next, and there will be glazing. Alright, let's do it. Just like any significant character, Yuta's experiences and upbringing massively influence the person that he is today. Well, like any significant character other than Hikari, because all we know about him is that he's a crippling gambling addict. As we know him, Yuta grew up with no knowledge of sorcery at all, despite being a descendant of the six-eyes wielding vengeful spirit Sugawara Michizane. After his best friend, Rika Orimoto, was speed blitzed by a Toyota Prius, he actually unleashed his sorcery for the first time and placed a curse on Rika's soul, hence the Queen of Curses was born. And when he was 16, Gojo took him in, gave him friends, and finally taught him all about sorcery, something he picked up on very quickly. His entire character is built around how he values his friends and will do literally everything in his power to protect them. He is an inherently loving person with a dangerous dark side. But would that still be the same if he was in the Heian era? Well, because of what we know of Yuta's history, let's just assume that he was actually born into the Sugawara clan and was aware of sorcery since birth. Let's also assume that Rika still died as a kid and was again cursed by Yuta. I think Yuta's natural caring personality would remain the same. However, the lack of Gojo's influence and the Heian era's harshness may actually mean he stoops to becoming a monster much easier. It was overlooked until recent events, but as I've said before, Yuta is a great balance between Yuji and Gojo. He will avoid becoming a monster whenever possible, but if left no choice, he will not hesitate to do what he needs to do. And in that sense, I don't think Heian Yuta would be much different. He will have friends, maybe a family, and Rika, and he will do anything to protect them. A big difference here, though, is that Yuta will actually have been exposed to sorcery for a lot longer than current Yuta has. Current Yuta didn't even know sorcery existed 2 years ago, yet his natural genius allowed him to climb all the way to the top 3 spot and compete with sorcerers who have much more experience than he does. Since he'll likely be learning for a much longer time, he'll likely be even more skilled than current Yuta in things like cursed energy control and hand-to-hand combat. Now, something we do know about current Yuta is that he does actually have a great Heian era mindset. As Arame said to Hikari, modern sorcerers are held back by their humanity and should simply become monsters. Arame then says that Hikari is not like other modern sorcerers though, something that Hikari then credits Yuta for since he gave that speech about becoming monsters too. In terms of raw cursed energy, he will probably still be second to Sukuna, but when connected to Rika, he can supposedly access her endless pool of cursed energy, so there's that. It's clear to see from all of this that Heian Yuta should be far closer to reaching his full potential than Shinjuku Yuta due to having more experience and training in the same time frame. However, what I'm going to show you now is why Heian Yuta's full potential could actually be much higher than Shinjuku Yuta's. As we know, current Yuta can connect to Rika for 5 minutes to gain the following: a fully manifested Queen of Curses, access to Rika's endless cursed energy, and access to his copy curse technique. However, in Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0, Yuta actually connects to the fully manifested Rika without any set time limit at all. It wasn't until he actually broke the curse and freed Rika's soul that the time limit was imposed. And of course, that only happened because a highly inexperienced Yuta went extreme diff against Suguru Geto. So the question is, would Heian era Yuta also manage to free Rika's soul? If he does, then he'd be no different to now in that he would eventually get Rika back and have the time limit. But if he doesn't, then his potential will skyrocket. With the assumption that he was born into the Sugawara clan, Yuta would actually have support from day one and likely would not end up spending years accidentally hurting people. After Gojo finally finds him, he teaches Yuta to channel the curse and keep it under control. So if he's taught this from day one, it will possibly lead to a very different and less traumatizing outcome. However, Yuta would care for Rika the exact same way and likely want to free her soul just for her sake, so it's still a very real possibility that he breaks the curse. And because both of these outcomes are entirely possible, I'm simply gonna consider both options moving forward with this video because f*** it. Now, when I said Heian Yuta's potential could be way higher than Shinjuku Yuta's though, the connection to Rika was not the main reason. The real reason Heian era Yuta's potential is so high is all because of his broken ass copy technique. Now, I think Yuta and Hikari are actually very similar in the sense that they are both ramp-up characters. However, they're also very different in that Hikari ramps up in a fight and then resets, whereas Yuta starts with nothing and then slowly ramps up over his whole life by adding new curse techniques to his arsenal. I mean, sure, all characters learn and improve across their life, but most of them are limited by the potential of their own technique. Yuta Okotsu, however, can keep on getting power-ups as he continues to add copy curse techniques to his arsenal, and this is the reason that Heian Yuta's potential is so unbelievably high. The Heian era is literally called the Golden Age of Jujutsu. Special grade sorcerers like Arame, Uro, and Yorozu were not exactly uncommon back then, so if Yuta was born into the Sugawara clan and had been involved in Jujutsu his whole life, he should have access to a massive range of special grade techniques. Not only could he be given them for free by Sugawara clan members, just as Inumaki did, but he would also have fought strong opponents in general that he could just take techniques from. We also know that Yuta is naturally gifted when it comes to using these copy techniques. All he really needs is to see it in action once, and then he immediately starts analyzing how it works in case he needs to use it. I mean, take his fight against the Heian era sorcerer Uro, for example. He analyzed her using it, copied it via Rika eating her arm, and then flawlessly utilized it in that very same Sendai colony fight. And not only that, but he also managed to pull off Uro's own extension technique called Thin Icebreaker. And bear in mind, prior to copying Uro's Sky Control, the only curse techniques he really had to work with was Curse Speech and Druv's Shikigami, but even that was gained from Sendai Colony. Now just imagine Yuta working his way up the ladder of Heian era sorcerers and slowly filling his arsenal with some of the strongest curse techniques in history. Now pair this with the possibility that copy actually has no time limit, and the fact that sorcerers around him can also just give him a head start. So far, there has been absolutely no mention of a limit to how many curse techniques he can copy either, but I do think it's pretty much infinite because Rika acts as an external storage, which means that the curse techniques don't have to put any pressure on anyone's brain. Now, if you remember, Uro was a leader of one of the Fujiwara clan's elite squads, and she got her ass handed to her by Sendai Yuta with only curse speech and some slicing Shikigami. Now, granted, Ryu delivered the final blow, but given her curse technique was burnt out and she was missing an arm, it's not like Yuta would have struggled doing the rest himself. We know frustratingly little about the Heian era, so I can't actually name many curse techniques he could copy, but the ones we do know of are Uro's Sky Control, Yorozu's Construction, Angel's Jacob's Ladder, Urame's Ice, Kenjaku's Body Swap, and any other curse techniques he had, Tengen's Immortality, and finally Sukuna's Shrine. Now, I'm not delusional, don't worry, no matter how strong Yuta gets in the Heian era, he's not gonna beat Sukuna, so copying Shrine is pretty much off the table. I do believe after collecting some curse techniques and training, Yuta could beat sorcerers like Yorozu and take her Construction curse technique, which is an insane technique to have for someone with access to endless cursed energy. Yorozu's Perfect Sphere Sure Hit is literally an insta-kill should it hit anybody in the verse, even for Sukuna. So by copying Construction, Yuta could literally steal the Sure Hit for his own broken-ass domain. Yorozu was also stated to solo the 5 empty generals, yet another Fujiwara squad, so I do believe Yuta would probably be capable of similar feats. Now, Arame is a tricky one, okay? If Yuta participated in that big final fight against Sukuna and took a 1v1 with Arame while Sukuna was busy fighting the others, he would definitely win, unlike a certain somebody somebody I know. Although in any other scenario, Urame would always be way too close to Sukuna to fight in a one-on-one, so I don't think he's really getting his hands on the ice technique either. Tengen and Kenjaku are sort of massively grey areas because again, we know fuck all about the Heian era, so I can't really comment on that interaction. The most interesting one here though is actually Angel. In that final fight, Angel actually led the charge with the remnants of the Sugawara clan, which suggests that they were probably allies. Now, considering Angel's willingness to let Yuta copy Jacob's ladder in the current time, it's very likely she would also agree in the Heian era. Although it's very possible that Angel's willingness to give it up in the modern age is something to do with Hana's little crush on Megumi, but we're gonna ignore that little detail because I fucking hate it. Unfortunately though, Jacob's ladder will not actually do that much against sorcerers in the Heian era because they are not cursed object incarnations. Still though, deactivating curse techniques is a very useful ability to have. I also think in theory Jacob's ladder could be used to completely deactivate opposing domain expansions because Angel actually says it also deactivates barrier techniques. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that a domain expansion is a barrier technique. Now in terms of fighting Heian era curse spirits, Yuta actually has an incredibly rare win condition. Outputting reverse curse energy offensively will literally one-shot any curse spirit regardless of their grade. The only exception I can really think of here is Mahito. To summarize though, Yuta could be unbelievably strong in the Heian era and would definitely stand at the very top with the likes of Yorozu. Now it's time for me to make my closing arguments and determine if Heian era Yuta would truly be stronger than Shinjuku Yuta. And me being the indecisive, constantly overthinking fuck that I am, I came up with two conclusions. Conclusion number one is as follows. Heian era Yuta would be significantly stronger than Shinjuku Yuta. And this is under the assumption that he would never have broke the curse on Rika and imposed a time limit. It would also consider all of the massively strong curse techniques that he could potentially collect in the Heian era. Now Shinjuku Yuta does have Sky Control, Jacob's Ladder and Shrine, although Jacob's Ladder is considerably stronger due to the circumstances of the current fight, and we haven't really seen him use Shrine enough yet. Conclusion 2 though determines that they would be equal, with Shinjuku Yuta maybe just taking the edge. And this is with the assumption that Heian Yuta does have that 5-minute timer. The main reason I think Shinjuku Yuta has a slight advantage is due to the massive buff that he got from soul swapping with Gojo. That soul swapping training should have fixed up Yuta's sloppy curse energy control, but more importantly, it gave him a domain barrier technique on par or at least very close to Gojo's. And when it comes to actual domain refinement, we know that Gojo is equal to the literal king of curses. Now, as we said, Heian Yuta would likely be more experienced and have trained for longer, but I don't think that would actually mean shit compared to Satoru fucking Gojo refining your control of cursed energy. Now, as I said before, Shinjuku Yuta does also just have Heian era techniques, including Sukuna's Shrine. So if Heian Yuta does get the time limit, then Shinjuku Yuta might actually be stronger. Okay, final reminder to angry people that this entire video is completely hypothetical and for entertainment purposes only. I also just want to shut down the argument of, oh, he would just die as a kid. One, that is not how that works. Just because it's the Heian era does not mean you're guaranteed to get spawn peaked. Uro, Urame, and Yorozu are all living proof that strong-ass sorcerers do actually make it to adulthood. And 2, sure, he might die. It's a real possibility, but do you really want me to make that the entire video? Hey, what if Yuta was from the Heian era? He will die. The end. See, it's bloody boring, bruv. What if Toji was from the Heian era? What would his life be like? Would he behave the same way? And most importantly, how would his strength compare to the monstrous sorcerers and cursed spirits of the Heian era? Before we get into all of that though, please bear in mind that this is a hypothetical made purely for entertainment. Assumptions will be made and glazing will be at an all-time high because, believe it or not, this is the first time that I am making a video purely dedicated to Toji. Also, if this video can somehow get 2k likes, then I will continue this series for many other characters. Oh, and make sure to subscribe because we are closing in on that 20k mark. Anyway, let's get right into it. In our timeline, Toji was born into the Zenin clan where he was basically just abused and crapped on for not having cursed energy, despite the fact that he was definitely the strongest Zenin we have ever laid eyes on. He then left and earned the title of Sorcerer Killer as he pursued his dream of escaping crippling unemployment and homelessness. Why he didn't just become a pro athlete is completely beyond me, but look, that's not the point. Despite how he was treated and how strong he was, Toji never really felt the need to prove himself or earn the title of strongest. Nor did he ever feel any desire to take revenge on the Zenin clan, unlike Maki. This obviously changed slightly when faced with awakened Gojo, but that specific instance isn't really important right now. In our alternate timeline, where Toji is born in the Heian era though, his motivations and mindset may turn out very differently. He would still be born into the Zenin clan, or whatever the Heian Era Zenin clan equivalent would be, and he would still be treated the same way and rejected by his clan. I say this because it's a whole ass theme explored by Gojo that Jujutsu society remains firmly traditional and refuses to change to this very day. By that measure, I think it's pretty clear to see that the way things are run should not be too dissimilar, and I believe once a big powerful clan realizes that they have birthed a child with no cursed energy at all, they won't be too happy about it. That being said though, the general mindset adopted by the strongest forces of the Heian era will almost definitely affect what kind of person Old Man Papaguro grows into. An argument could be made that he will turn out the exact same way he did as the original timeline. But if I go down that route, then like what the hell is the point in even making this video? That's the thing about alternate realities, there are literally endless possibilities. I mean, for all we know, there is one where Toji is raised by a horde of man-eating Teletubbies in a faraway land. I mean, sure, that example's a little extreme, but you get the point. Anyway, the route that I have decided to take is that Toji's persona and mindset will be influenced by the ways of the Heian era. He won't necessarily feel the need to prove himself to his clan, but he will partially adopt that monster mindset and then strive to prove that his total mastery of the body trumps a sorcerer's mastery of cursed energy. This way, I find it actually really nicely parallels Sukuna's motivation to prove the opposite of this when fighting Maki Zenin in Shinjuku. I mean, sure, this search for ultimate strength is incredibly common among the strongest of the Heian era, but for Toji, well, for Toji it's a little bit different. He does not work like every other sorcerer. He is the Invisible Man, the ghost of the Zenin, the man who escaped cursed energy and the chains of fate. He is Toji Zenin, the sorcerer killer, or in this case, the Heian era sorcerer killer. Do not be fooled though, he will step away from his clan and go down his own route just like he did in the original timeline. All that this changes is that when faced with opponents, he will not back down, rather rise to the challenge and attempt to prove his worth. And with Toji still being, well, Toji, he will definitely appreciate a little bit of cash every now and again. What I imagine will happen is he will build a bit of a reputation for himself and be acknowledged as being different to a normal sorcerer, what with his lack of cursed energy and insane resistance to curses. My personal headcanon is that he would become a bounty hunter slash freelancer of sorts that takes jobs from non-sorcerers looking for protection. So like hunting down threats, exercising lurking curses, and also to basically serve as hired muscle and protection. Exercising curses, killing the strongest sorcerers, making money, and proving that his strength trumps that of cursed energy is the name of the game for Heian era Toji Zenin, and I think it is cool as shit. Now that I have established what route Heian era Toji will go down in this timeline, it's time to move on to the really exciting stuff. Toji's reputation as the sorcerer killer will inevitably spread throughout Japan. The legend of his heavenly restriction will undoubtedly grab the attention of the strongest sorcerers and cursed spirits across the country, and they would all strive to seek out this legendary ghost with the hope of securing a chance to prove that their jujutsu is superior to Toji's godlike body. But no matter how hard any of them try, they will not find him. If Toji is interested, or if there is money on the line, then best believe he will find them. Even top-of-the-line sorcerers like Uro, Yorozu, and Ryomen Sukuna himself will not be able to find Toji unless Toji wants them to. Whether Toji can actually beat these opponents is a completely different question entirely though. His heavenly restriction gives him godlike senses, superhuman physicals, and the ability to become more or less undetectable to other sorcerers. His insane battle IQ and resistance to curses also gives Toji a massive advantage against most other sorcerers. I mean, he did deadass outsmart and defeat Teen Gojo and Geto on their own damn turf. Like, come on, give him some respect. Also, for the sake of awesomeness, we're gonna give him the exact same kit he has in the original timeline. He will have his trusty hidden inventory worm, which holds his endless supply of cursed tools, including the Chain of 1,000 Miles, the original Soul Split Katana, and of course his iconic inverted Spear of Heaven, which forces the release of all active curse techniques. I'm sure some of you are gonna go, well, how the fuck is he gonna get those in the Heian era? Well, first of all, we have no idea where he got those or how he got those in the first place, so there's really no reason to say he wouldn't just get them the same way again. Secondly, it's a what if video, bro. Like, Toji wasn't from the Heian era either but like that is kind of the whole point of this, you know? So yeah, he basically will just be as insanely overpowered as he was in the original timeline, but with this new dangerous drive to prove his worth against those with cursed energy. The absolute best part about Heian era Toji though, is how he interacts with domain expansions. The Heian era is often referred to as the golden age of Jujutsu, where special grade level cursed spirits and sorcerers were roaming free. Insane levels of cursed energy, crazy output, and natural talent was just the norm in the Heian era. But as we know, when it comes to cursed energy, there is one thing that lies at the absolute top of it all. The pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery, domain expansion. Domains are the make or break of a sorcerer's battle, and they were much more commonly used in the Heian era compared to modern times. In the vast majority of cases, however, Toji Zenin is completely immune to domain expansions due to having zero cursed energy. I mean, sure, he can be trapped inside a domain's barrier should he agree to enter, but the sure hit will not be able to detect him as a target, making the use of a domain a complete waste. Domain expansions take a crap ton of cursed energy and burn you out of your curse technique, so they are often used as a final trump card. But unless you have a domain like Sukuna's, which targets things without cursed energy, then using a domain on Toji will only hurt your odds. This is the perfect example of why there is so much to prove between a heavenly restriction and a sorcerer. Toji's very existence quite literally rejects this all-powerful pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery. And the final main advantage that Toji has against sorcerers is his healing factor, which should be pretty similar to Maki Zenin's. Surprisingly, reverse curse technique was actually not as common as you would think in the Heian era. Neither Uro nor Yorozu had it, or at least they didn't have it at the same level as sorcerers like Yuta, Yuki, Gojo, and Kenjaku. Sukuna and Urame do possess RCT at a very high level, but like, come on, that's no surprise, right? Toji's advantage here though is that although his healing is slower than RCT, it is passive and takes no energy or stamina to complete it. It is simply a very fast, natural healing factor, whereas reverse curse technique takes concentration and 2 times the normal cursed energy, so it's very draining. In terms of physical stats, Toji's speed is supposedly just above that of Three Finger Sukuna's, which is definitely no laughing matter, and he was also just blatantly faster than pre-awakened Gojo. Overall though, Toji's physical stats should be pretty relative to Maki's, since they are stated to be equals by the narrator himself, and Maki was 1v1ing a weakened and domainless Heian form Sukuna, as well as tanking close-range dismantles and 2 whole black flashes, which again is nothing to be scoffed at. Throw his massive brain, healing, domain immunity, broken-ass curse tools, and a Heian era mindset into the mix, and you have yourself one hella scary opponent. Like I said, this is crazy glaze, but I have never spoken about Toji on my channel before, and I've realized that I have a newfound appreciation for him. He genuinely might be top 5 in the verse, but obviously we should really put that to the test by actually placing him up against the Heian era's strongest opponents. When talking about Toji versus the rest of the Heian era, it's important to draw on the context that we have previously discussed. Many sorcerers, like Yorozu, would probably seek him out in the hopes of proving that their Jujutsu is superior to his heavenly restriction. Hell, I mean, given what Toji looks like, I wouldn't be surprised if Yorozu completely abandons Sukuna and goes and falls in love with Toji instead. Toji's very existence will literally force that duty onto the Heian era's strongest monsters the same way that Maki did to Sukuna. As we said, they won't find Toji, Toji will find them. And it's important to note that this is not purely about beating Toji. He will not simply get jumped by a group of sorcerers who want to beat him. There would be an element of respect involved. The whole point is about proving Jujutsu over the body, and that could not be done unless it is a fair fight. Anyway, let's begin by talking about cursed spirits. Sukuna said that the Heian era was crawling with strong cursed spirits around the same level as Jogo. If Toji is being hired to exercise cursed spirits on that level, then I don't think he's gonna have any trouble with them at all. I mean, Soul Split Katana just straight up negates durability, any annoying curse techniques can be dealt with very easily by the inverted Spear of Heaven, and Toji is immune to domain expansions, so I honestly don't see any cursed spirit being an issue for him. And don't get me wrong, it would be really nice if we actually saw anything from the Heian era to be able to draw on here, but Gege did Gege things, so we've kinda just gotta assume. Anyway, next up there is Yorozu, one of the strongest of the Heian era and another character that is arguably top 5 in the verse. She possesses the broken as hell construction technique that she has adjusted to make up for efficiency issues by using a very malleable liquid metal. In her bug armor, her stats are enough to damage and low-key blitz a holding back 15-finger Megana. I mean, yes, he was holding back and taking the hits for adaptation on purpose, but this is still crazy impressive regardless. Stats-wise, she might genuinely outclass Toji, but not by a lot. Unfortunately for Yorozu though, higher stats will simply not be enough to win this fight. Once Inverted Spear of Heaven makes contact, it will literally release any control Yorozu has on her liquid metal. Tying it to the chain of 1,000 miles also means that he basically has a ranged Inverted Spear of Heaven, which is just crazy. Yorozu also displayed no signs of reverse curse technique, and despite the fact that she has improved her curse technique's efficiency, Sukuna does point out that her main weakness is still that efficiency. All Toji really has to do is keep baiting Yorozu's attacks until she eventually bottoms out or uses a domain, which would be a massive blunder on her part. Also, yes, the perfect sphere is hella strong, but it is stated to move at a moderate speed outside of a domain, and putting it inside of a domain will not help against a sorcerer killer like Toji. So yeah, Toji would definitely be victorious here. And then of course there is Uro and her celestial squad. Now I know these guys are technically sent on missions by the Fujiwara, so I'm not really sure why they would ever face off with Toji, but screw it. Let's be real, if Yorozu ain't beating Toji, then Uro sure as hell isn't doing it either. Especially when she got packed up by Sendai Yuta, who is probably weaker than Toji. Inverted Spear of Heaven would just straight up rip through her sky control, and she would never in a million years be able to land a thin icebreaker on him. Even if she did, it would probably just sting a little. I mean, Maki literally got rammed by a supersonic rocket, and then spent 3 minutes healing up, and she was good to go. So I don't think Toji is really gonna go down to anything less. And yet again, the pinnacle of Jujutsu, her domain expansion, is completely useless here. Maybe if all the members of her squad jumped him at once, then they would have a chance, but I still say Yorozu has a better chance than even all of them combined. The only sorcerers besides Sukuna that I think would actually be a genuine threat to Heian era Toji is actually Urame. As far as we know, Urame has no domain because they simply don't need one due to their absurdly powerful ice technique. They also do have a very proficient reverse curse technique, and they have the stamina to go toe-to-toe with Hakari for half an hour, which is kinda crazy. Their ice technique has a massive range, and it is so strong that it could even trap Maki when she was off guard fighting Sukuna. Even with his precognition and resistance to curses, Toji will legitimately have a hard time avoiding damage from Urame's massive blasts of ice. Hakari was simply a bad matchup because he just wouldn't die and could sacrifice as many limbs as he needed in order to escape the ice. Inverted Spear of Heaven will only do so much to break the constant flow of ice tsunamis that Urame will throw at him, so he needs to be smart about it and use his undetectable presence to his advantage. Urame was low-key getting tossed around by Hakari once he closed the distance, so I think it's safe to say that if Toji does the same, he will straight up win mid-diff. But I admit, getting that opening against Urame will be hella challenging for him. And that of course brings us on to the main event, Heian Toji versus a prime Heian King of Curses. And obviously Toji will lose, that is simply not a debate. But what is interesting about this fight is that Sukuna will at least show a lot more interest due to him feeling the same way that he did against Maki. He will feel like Toji has pushed a duty on him to prove Jujutsu superiority over the body and actually lock in for once. Which is even more of a reason why Toji gets completely destroyed, I'm not gonna lie. He may actually have a half-decent fight against Sukuna in hand-to-hand combat because his precognition actually allows him to avoid slashes. But unfortunately, Malevolent Shrine targets things even without cursed energy, meaning that Sukuna is most definitely superior here. I mean, still though, when Ryomen Sukuna is the only sorcerer that can prove their worth against you, then you know you're one of the GOATs. I think he's very similar to Gojo in that way. What if Gojo turned evil or went completely insane? You may think the concept of evil Gojo is boring because he would just destroy everybody. And you're right, kinda. That's the thing about alternate timelines though, there are literally endless possibilities. Because when it comes to characters that have every right to become a villain, Satoru Gojo is definitely up there. And trust me when I say, some of these scenarios are crazy interesting and do not play out anything like how you think. Especially when we get on to discussing Shibuya. So remember to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel because it really does help a lot. Like, really, my financial situation is looking worse than Toji's right now, so please just do me a favor. Anyway, let's get started. I think we should start at the beginning with the hidden inventory arc. Let's be real, before Awakening, Gojo was an arrogant, spoiled, and entitled brat. But then Bossman Papaguro showed up and absolutely wiped the floor with both Gojo and his edgy emo boyfriend. Oh, and he also shot that poor little girl in the head, but like, who really gives a shit about that? God knows Gojo didn't, dickhead. A lot of people like like to talk about a scenario where Gojo is the one who turns evil and Geto is the one who remains, well, mentally stable. But I think that's unrealistic because Geto was already going delulu due to his whole toilet rag swallowing technique, which I must say is very understandable. What I think is much more likely though is that both Gojo and Geto lose their minds together and decide that the monkeys need to die. After all, at the beginning of the arc, Gojo was the one complaining about having to protect the weak, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that he too adopts Geto's mass murder mindset, and so the pair of them would leave Jujutsu Society behind and begin their mission of deleting all of those useless muggles from the face of the earth. Okay, I say the pair of them, but come on, let's be real, what the fuck would Geto contribute to this? Gojo is literally gonna do it all himself. Geto for real just gonna be turned into a housewife and be like cooking him meals and shit. Now with Toji dead and Gojo having awakened his true power, there is not a single sorcerer alive who could possibly oppose them. So yes, this is a very clear-cut case of Gojo turning evil and then straight up winning. In fact, I would actually say this is the least probable scenario and definitely the most boring. But is this the only scenario where he could slightly lose his mind? No. So let's move on to some way more interesting situations, and I mean way more. Chapter 10 of Jujutsu Kaisen. Satoru Gojo sits in a morgue staring at the lifeless corpse of one of the most promising and pure-hearted students he has ever had, Yuji Itadori. The Jujutsu higher-ups went behind Gojo's back and sent the first years on a suicide mission, which pissed Gojo off beyond belief. In fact, in the chapter, Gojo even says that he might just go and kill off all of the Jujutsu higher-ups himself so that he can reset Jujutsu Society. And even Shoko admits that she has rarely seen Gojo get that worked up about something. In the canon timeline, Gojo keeps a level head and decides against this because he has a dream. A dream where he nurtures the new generation to become the change that he wishes to see. In our alternate timeline though, things don't go down quite as smoothly. And the trigger for this is that in our timeline, Yuji isn't the only body lying in that morgue, but Nobara's too. His two new first years had their youth taken away from them by the higher-ups during their very first mission, and he was not there to do anything about it. Obviously, Yuji is lucky enough to be revived by Sukuna, but that doesn't change what's going through Gojo's mind at that moment. All of the trauma and hatred and isolation will build up and he would eventually snap. Keeping a level head is no longer an option for Gojo, so he stands up without saying a word and decides that he will do it himself. All the higher-ups, the conservatives, and the upper factions of the big three clans. He would decide that they all need to die right here and now, including his own family, which I found would parallel Geto's defection quite nicely. He starts off with the higher-ups that ordered Yuji and Yuta's execution, but that simply will not be enough. As soon as word gets out that Gojo has finally turned against them though, a notice is sent out to all sorcerers and big clans that Satoru Gojo is now considered a special grade threat which must be executed immediately. So as Gojo tears his way through the Kamo clan and his very own Gojo clan, his students, including Yuta and Yuji, prepare to make a stand against him. And yes, I wholeheartedly believe they would oppose Gojo's violent actions. Yuji's mindset at that point revolves around people having a proper death, and Gojo is delivering a very crappy death to hundreds of people, some of whom won't have even actually done anything wrong, at least not directly. Yuta will recognize that Gojo is not in his right mind and see him making the same mistakes that Geto made. His experience with Gojo and Geto in JJK0 is what will turn him against Gojo, as well as choosing to support his friends. Maki wants to eradicate the Zenin clan herself, and Megumi is driven purely by his own morals. So I believe that these two would also take a stand against Gojo, but it's a little bit more up in the air with them. They're kind of a moral grey area sometimes. All of his other Tokyo students will likely just be against mass murder in general and see it as their duty to try and stop it. And Hikari, well, Hikari won't really know, nor would he give a single shit, so screw Hikari. Sorry, gambler. So when Satoru Gojo is done annihilating everybody else, he will finally pull up to the Zenin headquarters, and he will find that all of his students will already be waiting to confront him at the main gates. This is obviously a problem for Gojo because the last thing he wants to do is harm any of his students. Even though he's not quite in his right mind, that is his motivation after all. They will undoubtedly try to talk no jutsu him out of it, which might actually work and make him concede. But the other option is that he ignores them and annihilates the Zenin clan anyway. Yuta Okotsu is the only one of them there with a domain expansion that could potentially trap Gojo, but it isn't likely to do that much at all, and Gojo would simply need to knock them all out or even use a 0.2 second domain expansion to render them all unconscious. Basically, assuming Gojo doesn't concede, the Zenin would still be annihilated. But this does low-key work out. Like, think about it. Gojo wants the new gen to be better and change Jujutsu Society. Him sacrificing his authority and worthiness to lead them by killing off the old generation will wipe the slate clean clean. His students then banding together to oppose him would also mean that he has somewhat succeeded at raising them to be better, which means they are ready to take over those leadership positions and officially reset that Jujutsu society. Everything would actually kind of work out at the expense of Gojo's life. Obviously, he won't literally die, but none of his students will follow him, and he will only become more and more alone. All in all, I think this scenario is actually very interesting, and we were way closer to this actually happening than you realize. Gojo does deadass sit there and deliberate this decision. As much as I love this scenario though, the next one is without a doubt the best and most action-packed scenario possible. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's dive right into what would have happened if Gojo snapped in Shibuya. So let's reset the clock once again. Everything in Jujutsu Kaisen plays out the exact same way it does in the canon material, until 8:31 PM when Satoru Gojo arrives in Shibuya. 9 minutes later at 8:40 PM, Gojo confronts Jogo and Hanami on floor B5. Sometime within the next 10 minutes, Gojo then crushes Hanami to death against the station wall. Gojo realizes that their plan was to lure him here and surround him with civilians in order to prevent the use of any big moves and a domain. Kenjaku estimated that there is only a 1% chance that Gojo chooses to use his domain expansion, but as we all know, Kenjaku was wrong. As Jogo and Chozo kill more and more innocent people, Gojo gets angrier and angrier. All that trauma and isolation builds up yet again. He knows that all these people are dying simply because these villains needed a way to beat him. The final straw for Gojo, though, was Mahito's arrival along with his horde of transfigured humans that cut down everybody in their path. Mahito's taunting made Gojo's mind go blank. He refused to play along with their little game any longer. So instead of keeping calm and using a 0.2 second domain expansion, Gojo snaps. He yet again enters that state he was in when he killed Hanami and let Jogo threaten all of those people. To put it in very simple terms, no fucks given. And so the strongest sorcerer of the modern era began his rampage. He doesn't even bother with a domain because it would risk curse technique burnouts. He simply used a blue enhanced high-speed movement to target Jogo first, and in doing so he quite literally ran through the innocent bystanders, A-Train style. Before he could so much as scream, Jogo's severed head hit the floor and was crushed only moments later under Gojo's footsteps as he approached Mahito. Knowing that he can't touch Jogo, Mahito surrounded himself with transfigured humans in a desperate attempt to protect himself. And that was when Gojo did it. And with that, he detonates a red strong enough to reduce half the station to dust. 50% of Mahito's transfigured humans get reduced to dust, along with even more of the human bystanders. But Gojo simply does not care. He is done playing games. Now, upon realizing that Gojo had resorted to completely decimating the station, Kenjaku fled with his tail between his legs in order to seek out his last chance at subduing Gojo. But we will get to that shortly. Unfortunately though, Gojo had not forgotten about Chozo. So before turning his attention back to Mahito, Gojo pulls Chozo in with a blue so aggressive that it even rips out the wall behind him, which crushes even more of the remaining civilians and transfigured humans. Unable to resist, Chozo is pulled towards Gojo, who then slams his fist all the way through his chest, just like what Sukuna did. And for good measure, he fired a small red blast at the very same time, which then sent Chozo flying straight back across the station and turned him into a red splat on the wall. Sorry Chozo, I love you, but it's for the video. Rest in peace. With Jogo, Chozo, and all of Mahito's goons out of the way, that leaves only Mahito, which means that Gojo can finally unleash his trump card. Mahito's brain will get cooked and render him unable to use a curse technique, meaning that a red, blue, or if Gojo is feeling super hyper, a purple will actually put Mahito out of his misery for good. And with that, Gojo leaves the station and brings his rampage to the rest of Shibuya. What Gojo will find out very soon though, is that this won't be anywhere near as easy as he expected. You see, as Gojo was demolishing floor B5, Kenjaku went out to enact his backup plan. Even in the canon timeline, Kenjaku and Mahito explain that the backup plan for dealing with Gojo, should Prison Realm fail, is unleashing Ryomen Sukuna. And as we also know from the canon timeline, once Gojo has been sealed, Kenjaku actually does make his way to Meimei and Yuji. So if Kenjaku simply did that same thing but way earlier and then kept on going, he would inevitably run into Meimei and Yuji Itadori. Now, timing is very key here, so Kenjaku would either kill Meimei as soon as possible, or scare her enough to make her just straight up leave with Ui Ui and abandon Yuji. We already know that Yuji cannot hold a candle to Kenjaku at this point in the story, so he gets beaten low diff and has all 10 fingers in Kenjaku's possession force-fed to him. And with that, a 14-finger Sukuna will temporarily awaken in Shibuya. Kenjaku informs Sukuna that Satoru Gojo is going on a rampage in Shibuya, which is all he needed to hear. I mean, sure, this may not be Sukuna's plan to take down Gojo for good, but it was a good opportunity to test the waters and throw some hands. After all, he would be an entire 13 fingers stronger than the last time they fought. Meanwhile, Gojo has promptly taken care of most of the rogue curse users and curse spirits that have been let loose in Shibuya. Best believe anyone lucky enough to escape Gojo's onslaught will never be seen again. With Gojo clearing shit up and Sukuna's presence suddenly appearing, all of the other sorcerers are given the order to withdraw and create a perimeter guard around the outer barrier, which means that the entirety of Shibuya is now one big battlefield for a 14-finger king of curses and a mentally unhinged bloodlusted Gojo to face off. Assuming that fingers are equal to output and cursed energy, Sukuna will only be at 70% of the strength that he was in Shinjuku, and he will also be on a time limit because Yuji will eventually get control again. However, Gojo will not have a small barrier domain due to not being inside the prison realm, which means that he will only have an inverted barrier to contest Malevolent Shrine. Now, there is literally no way to actually scale Sukuna fingers at all, so I'm gonna do what all hardcore power scalers absolutely despise and just make an assumption based on literally nothing. I think Sukuna will have output low enough to yet again stalemate Gojo's inverted barrier for 3 minutes. I know this didn't happen in Shinjuku, but because of the lower output, I think it will here. But with this battle being a very short-term thing without much time for planning, I deadass do think this fight goes either way, which means there are only 2 possible outcomes here. Sukuna will kill Gojo with Malevolent Shrine, or Gojo will beat Sukuna or at least survive long enough for Yuji to take over his body yet again. What's funny though is that the good guys could actually low-key win either way, at least in the short run, because if Sukuna beats Gojo, then sure, Gojo is gone, but Sukuna is still locked up in Yuji with no guarantee that he will be able to take over Megumi. Mahito is dead, so Kenjaku doesn't really have any immediate way of starting the culling games either, and by that extent, if Gojo survives, then Kenjaku still can't start the culling games, and is even more fucked because as soon as Yuji tells Gojo about Geto, he will hunt him the fuck down. Like, best believe he will go after that man so hard. I admit though, in the very rare case that Gojo dies to a 14-finger Sukuna within that time limit, then I'm sure Sukuna will eventually still find a way to take over Megumi, and then everybody else is so unbelievably cooked. Overall though, I know this what-if scenario is unrealistic and completely fucking ridiculous, but I had a lot of fun making it, and I hope a lot of you will enjoy watching it too. My mindset is kind of that if you're gonna make a what-if video, then you might as well go all in and chuck logic out of the window. The whole point is entertainment after all. Yo, I just wanted to let you guys know that this upcoming what if video is actually really outdated. Like, I'm gonna say some stuff that is completely outrageous and just outright wrong, okay? But I need you to remember it was early days, so I didn't know what I was talking about, and it's just waffle, but I'm gonna leave it in the video for fun. Enjoy. If you're expecting a 30-second video of me saying how Heian era Sukuna no diff 360 one-taps Gojo, then f*** off. That's right, it's finally time to break down how Heian era Sukuna versus Satoru Gojo would have gone down without Mahoraga in play. Due to how little we actually know about Sukuna, it's very difficult to determine exactly what he's capable of, so drawing a concrete conclusion isn't really possible at the moment. All we can do is look at the possible outcomes and decide who we think is most likely to take it. At the point of me releasing this video, there is definitely no right answer, because no more about Sukuna has been revealed than we already know. That being said, we can definitely try our best to narrow it down, so let's get started. First of all, we need to lay out some key assumptions of this fight. One being that Sukuna is in his Heian era form and does not have Mahoraga. The second being that neither of them are holding back for any reason. They will take any chance to kill each other. The fight before Domain Clash 1 will stay the exact same it was, with Sukuna taking a 200% hollow purple like an absolute fucking champ and then losing a couple of arms. They'll do their normal shit talking and some building throwing, and Sukuna will also still use domain amplification when fighting, but 2 arms, 4 arms, it doesn't matter. Sukuna is not killing Gojo with a domain amplification punch to the face. It's just not happening. Just like in the actual fight, they will both open their first domain expansions. Sukuna will still break Gojo's barrier from the outside, and then Gojo will start running reverse curse technique at full throttle in order to keep the slashes at bay. Now this is where shit really starts to get interesting, and I am going to give a quick disclaimer. I'm considering all possibilities for the sake of fairness and entertainment in this fight. If you think one outcome is way more possible than the others, then that's completely fine. But I am going to cover all the outcomes that I think are possible. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on it, so please don't hesitate to comment and tell me that I'm batshit crazy. Anyway, like I said, there are so many unknown variables surrounding Sukuna that it's impossible to determine what he is really capable of until we actually see it. Malevolent Shrine's 100% hit is a volley of cleaves and dismantles. Cleave can supposedly be adjusted to any opponent's durability, so in theory it should just one-shot Gojo. Even though he's got incredible healing and reinforcement, Sukuna's output could actually just go that high that he fully slices Gojo in two, right then and there. And that could very well be the end of the fight. We just don't know. But since we've never seen Sukuna challenged by someone of Gojo's level, then it's also very possible that he can't do that. So we are going to continue on, assuming that Gojo does not get one-shotted by Sukuna's domain. Outcome 2 involves Gojo's constant healing and reinforcement buying him enough time to activate Simple Domain, and this will let him avoid the guaranteed hit of Malevolent Shrine for a little while. But Sukuna will still attack him, just like he did in the real fight. Sukuna, though, will not predict Gojo healing his burnt out curse technique and will get hit with a point-blank red. Gojo will then use his renewed curse technique to expand a second domain with inverted conditions. In the actual fight, Gojo expresses surprise at how Sukuna took a risk and still attacked the stronger outside rather than the weaker inside. Now, some people do think that Sukuna took the risk because he wanted Mahoraga to adapt to Infinite Void, although I've realized that this doesn't make sense, which I'll cover in a minute. Now, breaking the inside of a domain barrier presents a challenge other than strength. Kusakabe GPT explains that breaking a barrier from the inside is rarely an option because you can't actually determine the boundary, and we also were told this when Megumi opened a hole in Horizon of Captivating Skanda. The only reason Megumi could create a hole to escape was because he had found the boundary upon breaking into it. Gojo also says that he was surprised Sukuna didn't try breaking it from the inside. Not just instantly doing it, try. Very important word. This means that although Sukuna would have been able to break the inside of the barrier fairly easily, it's not as simple as that because he needs to actually find the boundary first. And bear in mind that he will need to do this while fighting Gojo in the domain. But since it isn't impossible, I think Sukuna should be more than capable of devising some way to do this. Although it will take time and will not be instant. Gojo would not have attempted inverting the conditions if he thought that it would be broken instantly. So no, it's not as simple as, oh, Sukuna will just break the barrier from inside because he was taking a risk. I do not think the reason that he took this risk was to get Mahoraga to adapt to Infinite Void, and I'll explain that in a second. The other way that Sukuna can break the barrier is the way that he did it in the actual fight. Sukuna would focus his effective range on the outside of the barrier, and he would then make a binding vow in order to increase his output by deactivating his guaranteed hit. He would then use domain amplification inside of his own domain, which is supposedly impossible, but he can because he's Ryomen Sukuna, to touch Gojo and then avoid Infinite Void's effects. Now, I've realized I actually have two major problems with this approach, which I'd really like you to help me figure out. I don't really understand why Gege emphasized the fact that this was a risky move by Sukuna. It suggested that he was doing it in order to get Mahoraga to adapt, but I've realized that that isn't possible. A lot of fans also say that Sukuna took the risk of not trying to break it from the inside because he wanted Mahoraga to start adapting to Infinite Void, but this just doesn't make sense. In order to survive being in Infinite Void, Sukuna had to use domain amplification to touch Gojo. Do you see where I'm going with this? Using domain amplification means he can't use the 10 Shadows technique to adapt to Infinite Void. He can still use the domains technique, that is dismantle and cleave, but not 10 shadows. So Sukuna did not take a risk here for Mahoraga because domain amplification disrupts adaptation. So no, he was not adapting to Infinite Void here. He simply just needed to do this in order to gain the output to destroy the barrier from the outside. My second problem with Sukuna using domain amplification to touch Gojo was just how easy it was. You telling me Satoru Gojo just allowed that? All he needs to do is make Sukuna let go for a fraction of a second and it's over. So why is he just standing there like a fucking One Piece fan who's seen a girl for the first time? Oh. Sorry, I really need to get all this out my system. Fuck, I can smell the comments already. Okay, I'm over it. I'm sorry. We're gonna keep going. If Sukuna successfully breaks Gojo's barrier from the inside, then Gojo will use Falling Blossom Emotion. If Sukuna touches Gojo and breaks it from the outside, one of two outcomes are possible. Gojo can stop daydreaming about what Utahime had for dinner and actually fucking do something, or Gojo can suck and Sukuna can be better. If he gets Sukuna to let go, even for a second, he wins. Easy clap. Infinite Void is most definitely the more dangerous domain when it comes to the guaranteed hit. So far in the fight, that's one possible win we've given to Sukuna and one possible win we've given to Gojo. Now remember, we are continuing with this fight under the assumption that Sukuna cannot just one-shot Gojo in his domain. We have already said that if that's possible, Sukuna just outright wins. Bear in mind that if cleave could be adjusted to any level of durability, then Sukuna would probably be able to instantly destroy Gojo's barrier from outside without breaking a sweat. So it's a very valid assumption that it has its limits. That being said, this is Heian era Sukuna we're talking about. He has 4 arms and 2 mouths just so that he can constantly do hand signs and chants to increase his output. We know that Sasori Gojo was able to boost his Hollow Purple by 80% by doing the necessary chant and hand signs. So I think it's also safe to assume that Heian era Sukuna would be able to increase his output up to 80%, which honestly could be enough to just one-shot Gojo. Even if Megana couldn't do it, I think it's very possible that Heian era Sukuna could. But like I said, there are too many unknowns. There are ways you can justify it for Gojo surviving, and there are ways you can justify it for Sukuna instantly winning. It's completely fine, whatever you think it is, but we're going to look at both scenarios. For the sake of the video, we're going to assume that Gojo survives, and we get into Domain Clash number 3, where Gojo massively expands his barrier and then rapidly shrinks it into less than a basketball size. Kusakabe is always really surprised whenever Gojo easily changes his conditions, although we know that both Sukuna and Gojo are just beyond the limits of everybody else, so it's not surprising that he can change his barrier conditions on a whim. I think this is Gojo finally realizing the optimum conditions that he should put his barrier in order to maximize his time in his domain before Sukuna breaks it. Kusakabe, our god of knowledge, even says that when you shrink the barrier that small, it should theoretically make it stronger. Now, if we account for the fact that he's fighting Heian era Sukuna with a much higher output than Megana, I think it's safe to assume that even with these optimized barrier conditions, he probably is going to get less than the 3 minutes he got in the actual fight. And since in the actual fight he only managed to draw at that 3 minutes, it's pretty safe to assume that Sukuna will break Gojo's domain before Gojo can hurt Sukuna enough. However, he will still hurt Sukuna. Sukuna will still need to be healing, he just won't manage to hurt him enough in time to cause a draw. And Gojo will yet again be trapped in Sukuna's domain and have to use Falling Blossom Emotion and then heal his burnt out curse technique. I'll also stand by my argument that even though it's much closer, Gojo has the close quarters advantage.
Hey, he only has the advantage because of Blue and Infinity.
Wow, really? He's stronger with his abilities? You don't fucking say. Now, it's very possible that Sukuna just whips out one of those mysterious black box techniques and blows Gojo to Kingdom Come before he even manages to heal his curse technique. But Sukuna does have an incantation to open the box, and it takes a second, meaning Gojo can actually run for an attack. Gojo's Six Eyes will also see Sukuna's cursed energy build or change if he starts this incantation. This is just another scenario where we don't have enough information about Sukuna, but it is very possible that Gojo doesn't hurt him enough in that time and just gets murked by a fucking fire arrow. But Gojo does now have practice healing his curse technique, which means that he should be able to do it relatively quickly and hopefully before Sukuna manages to change attacks. Once expanding his fourth domain, his Infinity will resume, rendering any new technique useless. Well, probably, but I'm not going to theorize about what these techniques could be because none of us know. Hell, we don't even know how Sukuna's real technique actually works. He could not even have any other secret techniques. Now, unlike the previous domain clash, Gojo does have the possibility of actually causing a draw this time. Gojo would not have failed last time and then just try the same thing again. He has been constantly adapting to Sukuna's way advanced domain and he won't stop now. Gojo would likely start healing his curse technique and activate Falling Blossom Emotion and then just keep wailing on Sukuna as soon as his domain failed. This would delay Sukuna's healing and then keep doing enough damage to eventually break Sukuna's domain. Even if it takes him more than the 3 minutes that it did in the actual fight, it will still eventually happen. He would expand his fourth domain ASAP and fully utilize his curse technique to keep piling attacks onto Sukuna. I am certain though that Gojo will only be able to achieve a draw here. I don't think he'll be able to break Sukuna's domain before Sukuna breaks his. If he struggled doing it against Meguna, then he'll struggle even more doing it against Heian era Sukuna. If Gojo achieves a draw and doesn't lose, then he will win.
Well, no fucking shit.
In order to win, Gojo needed to break Sukuna's domain before Sukuna is able to break his domain, which was a 3-minute window in the actual fight, although we're going to reduce it by a little bit because this is Heian era Sukuna. I don't really know by how much, but we'll just say it is less than 3 minutes. Now, we've theorized that Gojo would fail to do this against Heian era Sukuna in the third domain clash, although we know that he can survive being in Sukuna's domain for a long enough time to heal his own curse technique and then expand another domain, so he'll likely keep piling attacks onto Sukuna during this time while using things like Falling Blossom Emotion and Reverse Curse Technique in order to hurt Sukuna enough in the next domain clash so that they are able to draw. But no, because he's fighting Heian era Sukuna, I don't think he will ever actually reach the point in the next clash where he can break Sukuna's domain before Sukuna breaks his. I think the best outcome Gojo can achieve here is a draw. And if Gojo achieves a draw by hurting Sukuna enough, Gojo wins. This is because Sukuna will have to copy Gojo's curse technique healing method, which will lag behind Gojo's due to Gojo having more practice. This will be Sukuna's first time actually ever using it. And just like in the actual fight, Gojo will be 0.1 seconds faster and Sukuna's brain will just turn to mush as soon as Infinite Void hits it. With absolutely no Mahoraga to come and save him and nothing he can do at this point, Gojo just wins. There is nothing that's going to stop him. Arame is not going to swing down out of the fucking ceiling like Tarzan. If Gojo does not manage to achieve a draw though, he is fucked. In fact, the only way Gojo wins in that scenario is if he expands his final domain and outright beats Sukuna's domain. Like, he must then absolutely break Sukuna's domain before Sukuna can break his. That is the only way that Gojo would win in that scenario. Even a draw would not work because we know that Gojo has pushed himself to his limit and is not able to open a sixth domain, and Sukuna can open another domain after that. In that scenario, Sukuna said he would trap Gojo in a barrier there and then just dice him the fuck up. So I think after a while of not being able to expand his own domain to counter and being stuck in Sukuna's domain, Sukuna would just win, especially against Heian era Sukuna. It might take a little bit of time to like properly wear him out, although I do think Sukuna would end up winning that fight in that scenario. And that will be the end of the fight. It won't ever get into a fight past the domain clashes because the only way for Sukuna to beat Gojo without Mahoraga is through a domain battle. Remember, everything we discussed was simply possible outcomes. We do not know enough to be sure. Overall, Gojo was awarded 2 possible victories and Sukuna was awarded 3. And no, that does not mean Sukuna would definitely win because that's not how that works. It just means that Sukuna has more scenarios in which he wins. I tried to make this video as easy to understand as possible, but to be honest, it's just a really fucking confusing topic. In fact, I've realized nobody fully understands the fight at all, including myself. Obviously, everyone is welcome to share their own opinion, and I really enjoy discussing and learning stuff from you guys in the comments, so please don't hesitate to tell me how wrong I was about something. Now, the real question is, who do I think would win? Well, I follow a flawless method of logical thinking, a philosophy that never fails to lead me to the truly right answer. So, I have determined, when in doubt,
always bet on Hikari.